We live with a comforting illusion, one that makes us feel powerful, in control, almost heroic. It's the belief that we alone shape our thoughts, moods, strength, and ambition. That everything happening inside our minds comes only from us and our own will. But biology, psychology, and even mathematics tell a very different story. We are not isolated islands. We are open, responsive beings. In neuroscience, there's a concept called mirror neurons, tiny mechanisms in the brain that allow us to mimic the actions and emotions of other people. This is what helps us feel empathy and connect as human beings. But it also reveals a deep vulnerability. The people closest to us don't just influence our lives. They shape our internal world. When you sit with someone, you're not only talking. You are sharing emotional states. Their anxiety can raise your cortisol. Their negativity can dull your excitement for new ideas. Without realizing it, you begin outsourcing pieces of your emotional regulation to the people around you. The ancient Stoics understood this long before brain scans confirmed it. Marcus Aurelius often wrote about guarding the inner citadel, the fortress of the mind. He knew a peaceful life becomes impossible when you leave that fortress open to people who bring chaos, bitterness, or constant turmoil. Yet today, many of us don't protect that space. We allow relationships to form by accident, or we hold on to people out of old habits, guilt, or fear of uncomfortable conversations. We collect relationships the way a ship gathers barnacles. Slowly, quietly, and those attachments begin to drag us off course. Sociologists Nicholas Christakis and James Fowler discovered that behaviors like happiness, smoking, even obesity spread through social networks up to 3 degrees away. Meaning, even your friend's negativity can begin to affect you. It's a startling reminder that we're not just individuals. We're nodes in a vast web, deeply influenced by the emotional health of those connected to us. And if that's true, then choosing who you spend time with is not superficial. It becomes a matter of mental, emotional, and even physical survival. So we must ask ourselves, as Seneca once did, if life is short, why do we waste so much of it managing the dysfunctions of others? Why do we keep allowing ourselves to drink from poison wells? Today, I want to talk about social pruning, the intentional and compassionate act of reducing harmful connections in your life. We're going to explore certain behavioral patterns that quietly sabotage your peace and weaken your emotional foundation. These people aren't necessarily bad or malicious. Many are simply struggling with their own battles, but their patterns may be incompatible with your growth. We'll explore who they are, how their behavior affects your mind, and why letting go may be the most loving thing you can do for yourself. And to begin, we start with a very common, deceptively draining character, the chronic complainer, often called the energy vampire. It's important to make a clear distinction. A real friend in crisis deserves support. Listening to someone grieving a loss, facing failure, or struggling through life, that is compassion. But the chronic complainer is different. For them, negativity is not an emotional moment. It's a lifestyle. They see themselves as victims, powerless, trapped in a world that never treats them fairly. And when they talk to you, they aren't looking for advice or clarity. They want a dumping ground, a place to unload their emotional clutter so they can walk away lighter, leaving you to carry the weight. The cost of these interactions is more than irritation. It is biological. Your brain, wired with mirror neurons, automatically mirrors their frustration, their hopelessness, their stress. You begin absorbing it. Studies by stress expert Robert Sapolsky show that even secondhand stress triggers cortisol in your body. Spend an hour with a chronic complainer, and your own brain becomes flooded with chemicals that harm memory, learning, and emotional stability. In simple terms, their constant negativity quietly rewires your nervous system. From a philosophical point of view, allowing this to continue is often a misunderstanding of kindness. We convince ourselves we're being supportive. But the Stoics would say we're failing to defend our inner citadel. By letting someone repeatedly disrupt your peace, you aren't guiding them toward strength. You're helping them stay helpless. When you keep giving space to constant complaining, you're quietly reinforcing the idea that complaining is a real solution, when in truth, it never is. Seneca wrote beautifully about this. He said we guard our property fiercely, but allow people to steal our time, our most precious, limited resource, without a fight. Every hour spent circling around someone's repeated negativity is an hour taken from your own growth, your creativity, or the relationships that truly nourish you. So the kindest thing you can do for them and for yourself is step back. You cannot rescue someone who is deeply attached to their misery. If they've built their identity around being a victim, then every solution you offer feels like a threat. It challenges the very foundation they stand on. That's why the healthiest form of love, in these cases, is distance. A simple boundary that says, "I care for you, but I cannot carry emotions you refuse to work through." It may feel cold at first. Silence often does. But silence is sometimes the only mirror strong enough to make a person confront their reality. And by closing that gate, you protect your own energy so you can invest it where it truly matters. As we keep exploring this social landscape, we meet someone even more quietly harmful than the complainer. The dream killer, the persistent cynic. Their damage cuts deeper because it often arrives disguised as caution, logic, or just being realistic. This is the person who, the moment you share a new idea or ambition, finds a way to deflate it. They don't usually shout you down. Instead, they sprinkle doubt with a calm tone. The market is too crowded. Most people fail at that. Do you really think you're good enough? On the surface, these sound like warnings from someone who cares. But beneath the words is fear, their fear. And they're projecting it onto the blank canvas of your potential. Psychologically, it's similar to the crab in a bucket story. One crab tries to climb out, the others pull it back. Not because they want to escape, but because staying inside keeps everyone comfortable. Your desire to grow threatens the unspoken agreement that everyone stays the same. If you succeed, it forces them to face the truth that they could have done something more with their own lives, but didn't. And that's a painful truth to look at. So the dream killer tries to stop you from climbing, not out of malice, but out of self-preservation. Their mission is simple: keep you in the bucket so they never have to confront their own limits. From a brain health perspective, this is extremely dangerous. These voices interfere with the dopamine pathways that fuel motivation. Dopamine isn't about pleasure. It's about drive, momentum, anticipation. When you imagine a goal, dopamine rises to push you forward. But in the early stages of a dream, that drive is fragile. A single cynical comment can trigger what scientists call a negative prediction error, a sudden drop in motivation. Instead of seeing your goal as exciting, you begin to associate it with fear of failure or embarrassment. Over time, if you surround yourself with these voices, you stop believing effort creates results. Not because you lack talent, but because your brain has been conditioned to expect disappointment. History shows this pattern everywhere. Every great innovator, from the Wright brothers to the early scientists, artists, and explorers, was told their dreams were unrealistic. Imagine if they had listened. Cynics build their worldview from the past. Visionaries build theirs from possibility. As Kierkegaard suggested, the cynic is trapped in the finite. The creator reaches for the infinite. And you cannot explore the infinite while chained to someone who is terrified of leaving what's familiar. This is why the wise often encourage silence when you begin a new journey. Share your plans carefully. Not everyone around you wants to see the mountaintop, because reaching it would expose their decision to stay in the valley. Their doubt is not a statement about your abilities. It's an admission of their own fears. Now, we shift to someone far more intentional and far more dangerous. The manipulator. The complainer drains your energy out of habit. The cynic drains your hope out of fear. But the manipulator drains you by design. To them, relationships are not emotional bonds, they're strategic moves. You aren't seen as a friend, but as a tool. They can appear charming, compassionate, or authoritative depending on what benefits them most. But there is always a hidden cost beneath their kindness. These individuals don't ask for favors outright. They craft situations where saying no feels cruel. They use your own empathy as a weapon, slowly eroding your boundaries until you realize your life has been rearranged around their needs. And the science behind why people get trapped in these relationships is unsettling. Psychologists call it intermittent reinforcement, a pattern discovered by B. F. Skinner. When rewards are given unpredictably, the mind becomes hooked. The manipulator knows this intuitively. If they were cruel all the time, you'd leave. So they mix moments of affection, warmth, and praise with sudden coldness, criticism, or withdrawal. Your brain starts chasing their approval like a rare reward. That unpredictability lights up the dopamine system in a way that becomes almost addictive. You begin walking carefully, adjusting your behavior to earn the next moment of kindness. Even strong-willed people can fall into this cycle because it bypasses logic and targets the emotional part of the brain. Manipulators also use gaslighting, a tactic that attacks your perception of reality. If you challenge their behavior, they twist the situation until you question your own memory or end up apologizing for things they did. It's one of the most effective tools for dismantling someone's confidence. This constant distortion of your reality creates cognitive dissonance, a painful mental conflict where what you see and feel doesn't match the version of events the manipulator keeps insisting is true. Over time, this wears down your confidence. You stop trusting your own memory, your own intuition, even your own eyes. Slowly, you begin leaning on them to tell you what's real. That is the deepest kind of loss, losing the sovereignty of your own mind. Hannah Arendt, one of the great political philosophers of the 20th century, once noted that totalitarian systems thrive not on true believers, but on people who can no longer tell the difference between truth and fiction. And on a personal level, this is exactly what a manipulator tries to create: a private, psychological dictatorship where their truth becomes the only truth. From a moral perspective, this violates one of Immanuel Kant's most important principles. Never treat another human being as a tool. Treat them as an end in themselves. Manipulators do the opposite. To them, you are not a partner, you are a resource, something to extract energy, attention, or emotional labor from. And that kind of objectification corrodes you from the inside. You simply cannot build a healthy, meaningful relationship with someone who refuses to see you as a full human being. To reclaim your life, you must face a hard truth. This is not complicated love. It's not two people figuring things out. It is exploitation. And the only winning move is to step out of the game entirely. Cutting the cord doesn't just restore your peace. It restores your ability to trust your own perception again. You return to a world where no actually means no, where truth is solid, and where kindness flows freely, not as bait in a trap laid for future favors. Now we turn to a quieter but equally destructive figure, the envious one, the person who simply cannot celebrate your wins. What makes this person so painful is that they often look like friends, or at least supportive acquaintances. They're present when you fail. They comfort you when things go wrong. But when something finally goes right, when you land the job, lose the weight, or find love, their mask slips. You see a flicker of disappointment before they force a smile. Or they immediately compare your success to someone who did better. Or they slip in a backhanded compliment like, "Wow, you're lucky," as if luck did all the work. This isn't just rude behavior. It's a signal. To them, your success feels like their loss. To understand this deeply, we have to look at evolution. For most of human history, people lived in small groups where food, mates, and resources were limited. If you gained something, it literally meant less for someone else. This zero-sum mindset is still wired into our survival instincts. Most of us outgrow it, but the envious person doesn't. For them, success is not something to admire, it's a threat. Sociologists call this relative deprivation. It doesn't matter how good their life is. If your life improves, they feel a sting of loss. And modern neuroscience backs this up. Brain scans show that when an envious person watches someone succeed, the part of the brain associated with physical pain activates. Your joy literally hurts them. And because people avoid pain, they may try to minimize your success or chip away at your confidence just to stop that uncomfortable feeling. This is where the danger lies. Keeping an envious person close forces you to shrink yourself. You begin hiding your achievements to avoid triggering their discomfort. You downplay your dreams. You make yourself smaller so they won't feel threatened. Do this long enough and it becomes a habit, then a personality, and eventually you forget how to stand tall. Some cultures call this tall poppy syndrome, cutting down anyone who dares to rise above the crowd. Nietzsche described it as resentment, a resentment toward the strong, not because they're cruel, but because their strength exposes the inner weakness of others. The envious person does not want to climb with you. They want to keep you at their level so the comparison is no longer painful. This is why you must seek out people who practice what Buddhists call mudita, sympathetic joy. These are people who can genuinely celebrate your success because they are secure in who they are. They don't see life as a competition. They don't keep score. Your light doesn't threaten them, it inspires them. When you remove envy from your inner circle, you're not just eliminating negativity, you're removing the ceiling on your own potential. You finally give yourself permission to win without guilt. It's sad to lose a friend, but it's far more tragic to lose yourself because you were afraid to outgrow a room that became too small. Now let's explore a type of toxicity many people underestimate: the gossip. This one often enters quietly, wrapped in what feels like friendship or insider bonding. Gossip feels exciting at first. When someone whispers a secret about another person, it triggers a primitive sense of inclusion, as if you've been invited behind the curtain. But it's a false intimacy. And the rule here is simple and absolute. If they gossip to you, they gossip about you. The moment you're out of earshot, you become the story they trade for attention. Evolutionary science tells us gossip originally served a purpose. Early humans used shared stories to understand group dynamics, who could be trusted, who couldn't. But the malicious gossip twists that instinct. They use information as a weapon, not as a way to build community. And neuroscience shows gossip lights up the brain's reward center, but also activates the systems tied to fear and suspicion. Deep down, your mind knows a boundary is being crossed. This creates a low-level anxiety that never fully disappears. You can't relax around a gossip because part of you is always wondering, how will they repeat this? What will they twist? How much of myself is safe to share? This constant self-monitoring is exhausting. It keeps you from forming the deep, secure bonds that make life feel safe and meaningful. Philosophically, the gossip represents a failure in how we use our words. Socrates offered a simple test for speech. 3 questions. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it useful? The gossip stories fail all 3. The gossip archetype fails every part of the ancient test. Their words aren't fully true. They don't lift anyone up. And they certainly don't offer anything useful for a meaningful life. When you sit and listen, even quietly, without adding anything, you still become part of the problem. You're signaling that it's acceptable to tear people apart when they're not in the room. That creates a spiritual heaviness. Words shape how we see the world. When you speak with malice or allow it into your mind, you begin to expect malice around every corner. You start assuming the worst about people. Before long, you're living in a constant state of suspicion because you've immersed yourself in conversations built on betrayal. In that environment, trust can't survive. And there's another consequence people rarely think about. High-quality, emotionally healthy people don't stick around someone who keeps company with gossips. People who value integrity and kindness have very little tolerance for petty talk. If you're associated with someone who spreads rumors, others will assume you allow or even participate in that behavior. To build a life filled with deep, meaningful relationships, you must remove the teller of tales from your inner circle. You must become the kind of person where secrets find a safe resting place, not a relay point. When you stop feeding a gossip your attention, they quickly wander off to someone more willing to listen. What's left behind is peace, a kind of quiet air where real friendship can finally breathe. Now we come to a very different archetype, the opportunist, also known as the fair-weather friend. This individual teaches us powerful lessons about the physics of reciprocity, one of the most important forces in human connection. The opportunist's presence in your life is entirely tied to your usefulness to them. They show up when they need something: your money, your influence, your connections, even your time. And their timing is impeccable. But the moment you need help, a ride to the airport, someone to talk to during a difficult moment, they disappear without a trace. They are ghosts, visible only when they want something, gone when you do. The deepest tragedy is the mismatch in perception. You see a friendship, they see a resource. You offer loyalty, they offer extraction. Evolutionary biology helps explain why these relationships feel so draining. Robert Triver's theory of reciprocal altruism says we survived as a species because we helped each other, and because we expected help in return. But when someone consistently takes and never gives, a built-in alarm goes off inside us. Psychologists call this the cheater detection system. Your brain instinctively senses that the social contract is being violated. This creates a mental burden. You begin keeping score how many times you've helped them versus how many times they've helped you. The math never balances. This constant evaluation prevents you from ever truly relaxing around them. You're not in a friendship. You're stuck in a bad business deal you don't know how to terminate. Aristotle described 3 forms of friendship: those of utility, those of pleasure, and those of virtue. The opportunist pretends to offer the highest form, friendship of virtue, grounded in shared values and genuine care. But what they actually offer is a one-sided, parasitic version of a utility friendship. The deception is what hurts most. It makes you feel replaceable, unseen, unvalued. When they finally discard you because you're no longer useful, the pain is sharp. They never saw you at all, they only saw what you provided. One reason so many people struggle to let go of opportunists is the sunk cost fallacy. You think about how many years you've known them, how much effort you've already given, and it feels like letting go would waste all that investment. So you keep giving, hoping that one day they'll return the loyalty. But that hope becomes a trap. Opportunists rarely change because their strategy works. It costs them nothing and gives them everything. Keeping them in your life blocks the possibility of real friendships, the ones built on virtue, mutual respect, and admiration for who you are, not what you can offer. Learning to close the door on an opportunist isn't cruel. It's wise. It's an act of self-respect. It's a declaration that your generosity is a gift, not something for others to exploit. Now we turn to a character who often inflicts the deepest wounds: the constant critic. Unlike the cynic, who directs their doubt toward the future, the constant critic focuses their negativity squarely on you and your present reality. Nothing is ever quite right in their eyes. Your appearance, your choices, your partner, your lifestyle, they dissect it all with surgical precision. Their comments often come wrapped in the language of care. I'm only telling you this for your own good. I'm the only one honest enough to say this. But if you look closely at the balance of your interactions, something becomes clear. There is no balance. There is no praise, no warmth, no acknowledgement of your strengths. Only relentless focus on the flaws. This is not guidance. It is control disguised as honesty. Neurologically, living with a constant critic is like living in a low-grade war zone. Your brain processes criticism the same way it processes physical pain, through the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. Repeated negative comments function like small hits of physical harm. Over time, your amygdala, the threat detection center, stays activated. You become hyper-aware, always bracing for the next attack. Walking on eggshells becomes your normal. But biologically, emotionally, spiritually, this is not a sustainable way to live. Living under constant criticism drains you in ways most people never recognize. It chips away at your executive function, the mental energy you rely on for decision-making, self-control, and emotional balance. After a while, something subtle but heartbreaking happens. You begin to internalize their voice. Their criticism stops being something you hear from the outside and becomes something you hear in your own mind. You start correcting yourself before you even act. You shrink your natural impulses. You rehearse your words and choices in advance, all to avoid their judgment. This is where confidence dies. You lose the freedom to be spontaneous, to be yourself, to act without fear. But here's what's important to understand. Their behavior is not really about you. In psychology, this is projection. A person who cannot tolerate their own flaws begins seeing those flaws everywhere else, especially in the people closest to them. The constant critic is often wrestling with a brutal inner voice of their own. They feel inadequate, unstable, or deeply insecure. Pointing out your mistakes gives them a few seconds of relief. For a moment, they feel in control. They feel superior. Their criticism is not a reflection of your worth. It is a reflection of their pain. And knowing this frees you. It doesn't mean you must continue tolerating the behavior. It means you can see their words for what they truly are, a symptom, not a truth. Philosophically, it's crucial to separate critique from criticism. A true critique is an act of love. It's collaborative, future-focused, aimed at helping you grow. It comes from a place that says, I see your potential. Let's make this even better. The constant critic, however, comes from a place that says, I see what's wrong with you. One elevates, the other diminishes. If feedback leaves you feeling paralyzed, ashamed, or smaller, it is not constructive. It is corrosive. Nothing can grow in soil that is constantly dug up to look for flaws. Even the strongest roots die from too much exposure. To reclaim your identity, you must step away from the microscope. Surround yourself with people who correct you to help you rise, not to remind you that you might fall. Now we come to a figure who challenges the very architecture of your emotional world, the boundary violator. Unlike the manipulator who uses strategy or the critic who uses judgment, the boundary violator disrupts your life simply because they do not recognize where they end and you begin. They treat the word no as an opening argument rather than a final answer. They drop by unannounced. They demand your attention at the worst possible moments. They ask questions so personal they leave you stunned. And when you try to set limits, they act offended, confused, or wounded. They frame it as closeness. We shouldn't have secrets? Or, why are you pushing me away? But this isn't closeness. Closeness is mutual. Boundary violation is one-sided. It's not shared space. It's occupied territory. In psychology, this often stems from a lack of differentiation. Healthy development requires learning. I am me, and you are you. Boundary violators often never fully internalize this. They operate from the belief, usually unconscious, that your emotional space, your time, your attention, and even your physical presence belong to them whenever they decide they need it. This may not always be malicious. Sometimes it's immaturity. But the effect on your life is the same. Your autonomy erodes. And when your world becomes unpredictable, when someone can intrude at any moment, your nervous system cannot rest. You live in a constant low-grade alertness, always bracing for the next interruption. The brain needs clear, predictable safety signals to enter a restorative state. Someone who ignores your boundaries is essentially removing the lock from your emotional front door. This constant readiness drains your energy, distracts your focus, and steals your peace. It even affects your relationships with others because a part of your mind is always reserved to manage the chaos that this person might introduce at any moment. Over time, resentment builds. You feel like a hostage in your own life. And here's the painful paradox. The more you give in to keep the peace, the more they disrespect you. You are teaching them that your boundaries are optional, that your life can be entered without permission. Philosophically, this brings us back to the Stoic concept of sovereignty. Epictetus taught that one of life's greatest tasks is learning what belongs to you and what does not. Your time belongs to you. Your peace belongs to you. Your values belong to you. Allowing someone to trample them repeatedly is a failure of self-governance. Boundaries are not walls meant to shut people out. They are gates. Gates protect what's inside. Without boundaries, there is no you available for relationship. You become merely a resource to be tapped. To handle a boundary violator, you must be prepared to endure their discomfort. You must move from requests to consequences. If you continue to speak to me this way, I will leave the conversation. If you show up unannounced, I won't open the door. This is not cruelty. It is clarity. It is announcing that you exist as your own person, and access to your life requires respect. Now we shift to a different kind of challenge. The know-it-all, the arrogant mind. This is someone who believes they walk into every room carrying the most accurate map of the world. They don't participate in conversations, they deliver lectures. When you speak, they aren't listening to understand. They're not really listening to you. They're simply waiting for your sentence to end so they can jump in with their correction, their opinion, their superior truth. Every interaction becomes a debate, not a dialogue, something to win, not something to understand. Their certainty is absolute, often loud, and almost always far greater than their actual knowledge. Dealing with them feels intellectually suffocating. Your curiosity begins to shrink because every question turns into a lecture instead of an exploration. The room loses its oxygen. There's no space for nuance, no room for "I'm not sure," and none of the vulnerability real learning requires. It becomes easier to stay quiet than to invite another monologue. Psychologically, this behavior fits perfectly with the Dunning-Kruger effect, the bias where people who know very little believe they know a great deal. But even deeper than that, it's a coping strategy. Uncertainty terrifies the human brain. At its core, the brain is a prediction engine. It wants to anticipate the future to keep us safe. Admitting, "I don't know," feels like admitting the world is unpredictable. And for some personalities, that is intolerable. So the know-it-all creates a false world of total certainty. A fortress built not from strength, but from fear. Being wrong, for them, isn't just uncomfortable, it feels like a threat to their sense of identity. That's why their reactions to correction can be so intense. They're not defending an opinion. They're defending their psychological survival. From a neuroscience perspective, this rigidity represents a lack of neuroplasticity. Learning requires the brain to update itself, to modify old connections and build new ones. This only happens when we experience prediction errors, moments when life surprises us or contradicts what we expected. But the know-it-all filters out those moments. They reject any idea that challenges their beliefs. This blocks the very signal the brain needs to grow. Their mind becomes a closed system, static, unmoving, stagnant. And if you surround yourself with people like this, you risk becoming stagnant as well. Healthy friendships stretch us. They reveal our blind spots. They show us the edges of our knowledge and encourage us to keep exploring. But if your circle is filled with people who insist they already know everything, you will eventually stop trying to learn. You'll grow silent. Not because you have nothing to say, but because it's too exhausting to fight for space in the conversation. And silence, in this context, slowly buries your intellectual vitality. Philosophically, the know-it-all stands against the very essence of wisdom. Epictetus gave one of the clearest warnings in history. It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows. Wisdom begins with humility, with the willingness to empty our cup. Socrates wasn't considered wise because he had all the answers, but because he was one of the few brave enough to say, "I know nothing." The know-it-all represents the death of philosophy because their love isn't for truth, it's for being right. Keeping such people close acts like an anchor in a flowing river. They hold you in place, preventing your mind from expanding. Growth requires companions who can sit comfortably in the unknown, who can ask, "What if?" instead of insisting, "This is how it is." If you want a life of continual learning, you must gently step away from those who have sealed their minds shut. Finally, we arrive at one of the most subtle figures in your social world. Subtle because their influence feels familiar, even comforting at first. The person stuck in the past, the keeper of your old self. This is the childhood friend, the nostalgic relative, the coworker from long ago. Anyone who cannot or will not recognize who you are now. They speak to you as if time froze around you. They bring up your old mistakes, your childish phases, your embarrassing stories, your past limitations. They interact not with the person standing in front of them, but with a ghost version of you that hasn't existed in years. When you've worked hard to become disciplined, they tease you about who you used to be. If you've finally found calm, they poke at you just to bring back the old anger. They act like curators of a museum exhibit you've outgrown, determined to keep the display frozen in time. They struggle with your growth because acknowledging your evolution requires effort. It forces them to update their understanding of you, and that mental work is something they often avoid. From a neuroscience perspective, this archetype is a major roadblock to neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself. Our brains function largely through associative memory. We link certain people, places, and environments with specific behaviors. That's why someone recovering from addiction is advised not to return to old hangouts. The environment itself activates old neural pathways. The person stuck in the past becomes a walking trigger for your old self. Around them, your brain automatically retrieves the behaviors and emotional responses you once used with them. Suddenly you're talking like your younger self again, feeling insecurities you outgrew, or reacting in ways you thought you'd left behind. This isn't weakness, it's biology. If you're trying to build a new version of yourself, Being surrounded by people who only recognize the old version creates a painful inner conflict. You begin burning mental energy just trying to maintain your new identity in a space that keeps pulling you backward. Philosophically, this takes us to Heraclitus, who said, "No man ever steps in the same river twice. Everything flows. Everything changes." The stuck-in-the-past person rejects this fundamental truth. They want the river frozen. They treat you like a statue, a fixed object, rather than a fire that grows, shifts, and transforms. When someone refuses to acknowledge your evolution, they are refusing to see you. And to be unseen is a quiet form of erasure. They are telling you, your effort doesn't matter. Your growth isn't real to me. They prefer the comfort of a predictable caricature over the reality of your lived transformation. This is where the Pygmalion and Golem effects come into play. When people expect greatness from us, we tend to rise. When they expect us to stay small, we often shrink to fit their expectations. If someone close to you only recognizes your flaws from a decade ago, you may unconsciously lower your performance just to avoid confusing them. You dim your light so they won't feel uncomfortable. But a full life requires witnesses to your future, not just archivists of your past. You deserve people who are excited about who you're becoming, not people who cling to who you were. Sometimes outgrowing someone is not betrayal. It's loyalty to yourself. You cannot drive forward while staring only into the rearview mirror. You cannot become the butterfly while staying chained to someone who loves the cocoon. As we reach the end of this exploration, it's important to recognize something. Identifying these archetypes is the easy part. Removing them from your life, that's the truly difficult work. It goes against some of our most ancient instincts. We are wired for tribe, for connection, for loyalty. Cutting ties triggers a primal alarm that whispers, "You are unsafe. You are alone." You may feel guilt. You may wonder whether you are being cruel or selfish. You may convince yourself that they will change or that their behavior is just a phase. But I want to offer you a different lens, one rooted in self-preservation rather than self-criticism. Consider Dunbar's number, the idea that we can only maintain meaningful relationships with a limited number of people, around 150 total, with an intimate core of just 5 to 15. Those inner spots are precious. They shape your worldview, regulate your nervous system, and influence your emotional health. Every seat taken by a manipulator, a critic, or an energy vampire is one less seat for someone who could uplift you. A friend, a mentor, a source of inspiration. By holding on to the wrong people out of guilt or habit, you are blocking the right people from entering your life. You create a traffic jam where growth cannot pass because the road is cluttered with connections that should have been cleared long ago. We also must address the fear of being alone. Many people stay in bad company simply because they're afraid of the silence that follows. But there's a difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the ache of being alone. Solitude is the power of being alone. Solitude is a laboratory for the self. It's where your real voice emerges, quietly at first, then stronger. It's where clarity, creativity, and self-knowledge take root. Blaise Pascal once said that many of our problems come from the inability to sit quietly in a room alone. If you constantly fill that room with people who belittle or drain you, you'll never hear your own mind speak. You'll live your whole life reacting, never originating. Ultimately, social pruning is one of the highest forms of responsibility. You are the gardener of your own life. Just as a gardener trims dead leaves to let sunlight reach healthier branches, you must cut away connections that no longer serve your growth. Not out of anger, not out of cruelty, but out of love for your future self. Your peace is not negotiable. Your inner circle shapes your destiny. If you want your life to be filled with meaning, joy, and calm, you must adjust the inputs. Remove the drama. Remove the cynicism. Remove the people who need you to stay small so they can feel big. And in the quiet space that remains after they leave, you will find something far more valuable than their approval. You will find your freedom.